Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the women of South Africa. To introduce this, the women's suffrage movement was a different process for each country. Whether some countries were more violent, more accepting, or not accepting at all. For South Africa, it was a little more difficult just because it was such a multi-race country at the time. White women wanted to earn the right to vote before the black men, but then black women knew that they wouldn't gain that right until the black men gained the right to vote. Some key women during this movement, um, two very key women was Julia Solly and Olive Schreiner. They were both very popular suffragists at the time. They were a part of the National Council of Women and would send letters to each other back and forth talking about the problematics and successes of the organization and how they can improve as a whole. They worked together to try to put a stop to their president, Irene McFadden, who would give out racist views during her lectures and meetings. When they finally stopped her, Julia became the vice president, and they both worked together because they believed that until everyone could be equal, then women couldn't be equal. It was also known that in the letters between Schreiner and Solly that they would talk very flattery towards each other. Another key woman was Elizabeth Maria Montina, also known as Betty. When she was at a young age, her father became the Prime Minister of South Africa, which means she would travel with him up to Europe or other countries, and this would help her gain the knowledge of politics and the people in their society. She would see more diversity when she would travel with him. But when she entered into adulthood, she wasn't the average woman who just jumped right into marriage and a family life. She actually started a teaching job at an all-girls school where she taught many young women the first ever sex ed class. Betty was mainly known as being the founding member of the South African Conciliation Committee. She held different campaigns to try to help the women in concentration camps during the Anglo-Boer War between the British. I wanted to talk about the positive people who made an impact on the suffrage movement, but I also want to talk about the negative people. And one of the negative people was John Xavier Merriman. He was a politician, a businessman, and the prime minister for the Cape Colony in South Africa in 1910. Even though he was considered a liberal, he had many conservative views that reflected in his political decisions. He would give out many speeches during the suffrage movement explaining how God made two sexes and they aren't supposed to be equal. Another one of his arguments were that men were created to go out and fight for their country, and the women were simply not strong or emotionally stable enough to go to war. He was hated by many women because of these tactics, but worshipped by the men of South Africa. Here are some key organizations for the suffrage movement. One of the first ones was the Women's Christian Temperance Union. It was created for the women's suffrage movement, which was founded in 1889. It began a campaign for alcoholic beverages and its physical and mental toll it could put on a person, but it later became a women's suffrage movement because the members of the organization were mostly women, and they soon realized that their voices wouldn't be heard until women got the right to vote and had an input in the political decisions. They then started to campaign for women's rights and equality when they realized this. The Federation of South African Women, also known as EFSA, was an organization created primarily for the women of color who were driven to bring South African women together regardless of their race. This organization started in April of 1954 by Ray Simons, who had the help of many other women to help start up the organization and to help launch it. This organization is what encouraged government officials to pass laws to help women have equal rights. The women accomplished this by organizing many protests, petitions, and meetings to talk about what needs to be done to help earn their rights. Many of these women would show up to the protests with their children on their backs or in their arms to help demand a change. I thought that was very inspiring just because being a mother as a whole is like a whole job. And then you're fighting for your equal rights and your right to vote. But you also have a full job as being a mother. So the women would bring their children to the protest, and I thought that was very inspiring. So during the suffrage movement in all countries, women didn't back down, they didn't stop fighting, and they eventually won the right to vote. Women are strong, fierce creatures, and when they want something, they won't stop until they have it. Even though they got the right to vote, they didn't get full equal rights, but they still didn't quit. Today, there are women still fighting for their equal rights, and they won't stop until they have met that goal. Thank you so much.